Hello friends, how are you all? Hope you're all doing great. So we are back with another amazing series on what if ISSEI was descendant of Mammon the sixth Satan. Power isn't everything. That is something Devorah Mammon knows well. Follow her as this reluctant Satan of avarice struggles to gain the greatest treasure of all, happiness. Dawn broke over a wondrous land of crystal, populated by plants made from living precious metals and giant mushrooms in a kaleidoscope of colors. One might have been forgiven for believing such a fantastical land was to be found in some heavenly realm or other, but in this case, that couldn't have been further from the truth. This was the land of greed, located in the underworld in the ancestral lands of the Mammon clan of devils. Located at the heart of the breathtaking land of greed was another incredible marvel, Spiral Urbis Ops. The spiral city of wealth as the city was known in English was built out and around a single massive hill-sized diamond. It was built on 7 levels, each carved out of and into the hill, and about each was set behind a wall, each of which had a single massive and well-defended gate. These gates were not set in a line. The great gate in the city wall was at the east point of the circuit, but the next faced half south and the third half north, and with each subsequent gate out off line with the previous. So the paved way that climbed toward the citadel turned this way and that across the face of the hill. It was a real-life Minas Tirith, but orders of magnitude larger and created by the devils of the Mammon clan centuries before Tolkien had even been conceived. At the apex of the city was a single massive pyramid, easily as large as the Great Pyramid of Giza, and unlike that great monument still in possession of its facade of gleaming marble, but black instead of the Egyptian counterparts white. It retained its capstone as well, a single massive black diamond. This opulent palace, for unlike the Egyptian pyramids this was no tomb, was the home to the rulers of this land of wealth, the Mammon clan. Seated at a wrought iron patio table on a balcony in the apartments at the very top of the pyramidal palace was the last of the once numerous Mammon clan, Devorah Mammon, and as she had her morning tea she let her eyes roam over her lands. She was a rosy-cheeked woman with the proportions of an average young woman in their mid-teens, with waist-long black hair that contrasted well with her fair skin and her startling orange eyes. Dressed in a simple but elegant black dress, she looked every bit the refined ruler. Bored of looking over a vista that she had spent centuries surveying she turned to the 2 empty places at her table. Looks like Lalausha and Atlan aren't joining me for breakfast today. Devorah sighed at this. Again. I know their duties are important, but I really wish they would spend some time with their old friend. It gets lonely to always eat breakfast alone. The devil noble admitted. If only we were children again. 0 line break 0 flashback Begin 3 young girls sat around a familiar wrought iron patio table overlooking the amazing expanse of the land of greed. Not that the girls paid the view any notice. The trio were too busy squabbling playfully to pay it any attention. Don't call me that. A 12-year-old Devorah Mammon shouted to her 2 best friends. What's the matter? Don't like your new nickname, Devi Lalausha Amon, one of the aforementioned best friends teased back. The sandy-haired and violet-eyed Lalausha Amon was the heiress of the Mammon clan's allies, the Amon clan, and due to that close association between their clans, and being the same age as Devorah the 2 of them had spent a great deal of them together growing up, and had thus readily become the best of friends. Devi the devil? Isn't that a little silly? Atlan Furfur commented in Devorah's defense. You're one to talk. Lalausha shot back without thinking. Atlan winced at that, even as Devorah sent Lalausha a chiding glare. Lulu ops. Sorry Addie. It was just a slip of the tongue. Lalausha apologized. It's okay. Atlan replied even though her hunched frame made it clear that sad as it was, Atlan Furfur was used to it. She might not like it, but it was something she had come to live with. Being a devil of the Furfur clan had many advantages, it being one of the 72 pillars and all, but it was also very much a curse, as everyone born to the clan was a hermaphrodite. A fact that unnerved many around them, even best friends she'd known since she could walk like Lalausha. There was one exception to this though, as Devorah proved when she slipped a hand under the table to squeeze one of the Furfur heiress's hand comfortingly. She might have first met Devorah as part of her father's plans to forge an alliance between their 2 clans by capitalizing on the fact that his heiress was the same age as the youngest of the Mammon children, but Atlan felt that between the 2 of them, they had forged something much more valuable. True friendship. So as I was saying, Atlan began, changing the topic away from Lalausha's slip-up and the upset it had caused, Devi might not be the best idea, Lulu. I agree. Okay. So maybe not Devi. But Devorah really does need a nickname. Lalausha insisted. That's true. Atlan agreed. I mean you guys call me Addie and Lalausha goes by Lulu. It's time you got a nickname too, Devorah. Fine. Devorah conceded as she crossed her arms and pouted. I don't see the need, but I can see where the 2 of you are coming from. Just not Devi, okay sure. Yup. Her 2 friends readily agreed. So what would like instead Lalausha began only to be interrupted by a new arrival. Sorry to interrupt you girls, but someone is here to see Devorah. Luzin Mammon, head of the Mammon clan and Devora's father, declared as he stepped out onto the balcony. Luzin Mammon was a particularly tall and lean devil with long limbs and a long face. His orange eyes, a hereditary Mammon trait, were piercing and narrow, and his short black hair was neatly slicked back, with the exception of 4 forelock bangs. Normally cool and imposing, he was known to easily strike terror into lesser beings from his presence alone. Today, however, he looked visibly rattled. "Father. Lord Mammon." The girls greeted. Lord Mammon waved the greetings away and turned to look at his daughter. "Devora, love, you must come with me. Now, father. Lulu and Addie just got here. We were going to have a tea party." Devora whined, her 2 friends nodding at her words. "I'm sorry, sweetie, but this cannot wait. Satan Lucifer is here to see you." "Lord Lucifer," all 3 young devils exclaimed in surprise. Which was to be expected. Not only was Satan Lucifer, the supreme authority of devilkind, requesting to see someone, instead of ordering them to present themselves, he was actually visiting their home to see them. As extraordinary as that was, it might have been understandable if he had gone to see a clan head like Lord Mammon or an heir like Devora's eldest brother, but to see Devora, the youngest of Lord Mammon's 8 children and so the least likely to inherit the headship. That was just unbelievable. "Yes, now come along." Devora wanted to ask her father what was going on and whether the Satan had asked for her specifically or the whole family, but from the harried look on his normally stoic face, she knew better. She could just ask later. "Bye Lulu, Addie. See you 2 later." "See you later, Devora." By DEVI Devora sent Lalasha a glare for that. And FLASHBACK0 line break 0 DEVI a voice sing-songed as its owner, a beautiful woman with mid-length red hair and wearing a bright yellow dress, embraced the last Mammon from behind. "Addie. Let go of Devi this instance." An irate Lalasha Amon, her hair now knee-length though looking longer due to her confinement to a wheelchair, admonished her best friend. "Hey you Lulu, don't be so uptight. I'll relax once you start acting your age. We're not 12 anymore." "Oh, I know." Atlan winked mischievously as she stood up and stretched, showing off her curvaceous figure. "Erg. That's not what I meant." Lalasha hissed as she self-consciously crossed her arms over her noticeably smaller bust. "You're just jealous." Not or 2 the 2 centuries-old devils might have continued their childish little squabble indefinitely if not for Devora giggling at their antics, the sound of which stopped them cold. Smiles spread across both their faces at the laughter. It was rare for their friend to laugh happily like that. "So you 2 finally decided to join me for breakfast?" Devi asked as she finally smothered her giggles. "We always intended to, just that someone had something come up at the last minute that needed us both to settle." Lulu explained as she sent an accusing glare at Atlan while her enchanted wheelchair pushed itself to the patio table. Furfur just shrugged as she slipped into her own seat. "Do I need to know?" Mammon asked as she gestured to a servant waiting patiently in the shadows to begin serving their meal. "It's not that urgent," Lulu declared while shooting a warning look at Atlan. "It can wait till you hold court later." "You sure we're sure?" Atlan cut in without letting Devi finish her question. "For now let's just enjoy a breakfast." Devi hesitantly nodded. She was worried about what issue had required the attention of both Atlan and Lalasha, 2 of her most able lieutenants, to handle, but she trusted them, and if they said it didn't need her immediate concern then it probably didn't. She could worry about it later. Right now, she was spending time with 2 of her oldest and best friends, and that was all that mattered. As the trio finished their breakfast, the topic of conversation shifted back to what had held Atlan and Lalasha up earlier that morning. "It's nothing to worry about in my opinion," Lalasha said as she waved a hand dismissively. "At least not yet. Maybe. But it also isn't something we should just forget about," Atlan countered. "Of course not, but still not something to worry about now." Devi couldn't help the smile that spread across her face at the byplay. Her 2 friends never could stop sniping at each other. But as bemused as she was still their ruler and she needed to know what they were talking about. So she cleared her throat and said, "What are you 2 talking about?" Both Atlan and Lalasha flushed at that, apparently having completely forgotten that they hadn't yet told their lady what they were arguing about. "It's the infinite dragon god, office," Furfur said as she turned to face her liege, utterly serious. "She appears to be mustering an army." Devi gasped. Why would the infinite dragon god, one of the 2 most powerful beings in the world, need an army? An army? For what? Devi asked, giving voice to her inner shock and confusion. "We don't know," Lalasha admitted. "None of Addie's sources have any clues, and without something to go on, we can't make any guesses either. But whatever her goals for doing so, ultimately an army can only mean one thing." Furfur began only to be interrupted by Devi. "War. Not again." 0 line break 0 flashback. Bajinsat was the depths of night on an empty barren plain in the underworld, one populated by nothing but corpses and one lone exhausted devil. This was the Megiddo Plain, a plain that sat on the border between the lands controlled by the devils and those claimed by the fallen angels. As such, it was a site which had seen more than its fair share of the war between the two races and the angels of heaven, who had more than once ambushed armies of both races as they fought here. That was already called the Great War. This day one such battle had just concluded with a decisive devil victory as they unleashed their latest weapon upon their foes, Devour Mammon, to devastating effect. Despite only being 13, the young devil possessed immense power, being one of only a handful of super devils who had the powers to possibly match even gods. It was for this reason that Satan Lucifer, a super devil himself, had visited her home all those months ago to forcibly recruit her into the ranks of Devilkind's armies despite she being grossly underage. Her father had tried to stop him, of course, arguing that she was too young, but his arguments had been shot down by the Lucifer, reminding him that he had already defied the Satans once by refusing to report Devorah's status to them despite standing orders to inform them of all super devils. Discovering these once-in-million superpowered devils was why the Satans had introduced standardized power testing for devil children in the first place, but her father had apparently discovered she was a super devil during her tests and tried to hide it. Despite this, the Satans had found out anyway and were using the fact that Luzin had tried to deceive them, a crime punishable by death, to hold the whole family at their mercy and as an excuse to use in the event of any future resistance to justify eliminating them. That was not something she could allow. Not if she could help it, and she could. Which was why she had willingly left with the Satan. Leaving behind everything she had ever known to serve on the front lines as the Satan's weapon in their war. As she caught her breath after the exhausting battle, she looked over the blasted remains of the Megiddo Plains, at the shattered corpses of friend and foe alike, at the carnage that she had wrought. She fought down her bile. She could not show weakness here, not now, not in Bravo. A job very well done, little Mammon. A devil that looked to be in his 40s with silver hair that fell to his shoulders and a beard complimented as he teleported in and surveyed the battlefield. He was Rizavam Lucifer, son of the Satan and another super devil. Observing this from afar doesn't do it justice. You really did leave none of them alive, did you know? Devorah replied emotionlessly. Just like you ordered, I destroyed them utterly. Oh. What an impressive little soldier you are. Rizavam said with a smile. You make me feel so proud for being your handler. Devorah didn't bother to respond, instead continuing to stare out at the devastated landscape around her. Meh. I'll get you to lighten up soon enough. Rizavam said with a shrug. In the meantime, father has recalled us to Lucifid. Apparently he has something special planned for us. Understood? Devorah replied, her voice as dead as it had been since the start of this conversation. Rizavam sighed as he called up a magic circle to teleport the two of them back to the devil's capital. I guess I really have my work cut out for me if I want to get you to stop being a robot. The son of Lucifer commented idly as the duo were teleported away. Flashback ENDS0 line break 0. The throne room of the Mammons was like so much of the architecture of their buildings, an incredibly opulent place, and befitting its importance doubly so. It was a vast chamber the size of a soccer field at the heart of the pyramidal palace. The room was lined by massive Greek columns made out of solid adamantite. Its walls, floor, and the ceiling of the arched roof was of pristine soulstone, the glow of which provided the room's illumination. At its head, on a raised dais carved out of dragon bone, was the throne of the Mammon clan. If the land of greed as a whole reflected the avarice and fortune of the Mammons in terms of mundane materials, the throne room represented their wealth by flaunting how they could spend some of the most costly mystical materials for little more than interior decoration. Unlike everything else in the room and the land of greed in general, however, the throne of the Mammons did not speak of the unsurpassed greed and wealth of the clan which owned it. It was a simple wooden thing made from a black poplar from the realm of the dead. While the rarity of the wood arguably made it as valuable as everything else that made the land of greed worthy of its name, unlike everything else, the throne's unstated simple design meant it was hardly as ostentatious at making this point as everything else. In that way, it was an embodiment of its owner. Like her throne, Devorah Mammon was every bit the greedy Mammon, she was just not as obvious about it as most would expect. Which was why she set her face into a mask of indifference, even as she inwardly reveled in the pomp and grandeur as her entry into her throne room to hold court was announced. All rise to pay respects to the ruler of the land of greed. The Satan Mammon 0 line break 0 flashback start. Apparently her recall to Lucifid had been for some kind of promotion for her to a rank that, in the words of the Satan Lucifer, reflected her abilities. What that rank was, Devorah didn't know and honestly didn't care. She was not fighting this war for ranks. So it was that on the day of her promotion, a disinterested Devorah walked down the red carpet of the grand palace of the Satans to kneel before Lucifer. She ignored the proceedings for the most part, keeping her eyes firmly focused on the floor in front of her as the six Satans spoke in turn to the gathered audience of the devil aristocracy. The only thing that had caught her eye was her family seated in a box on the level normally reserved for the families of the Satans. Briefly Devora pondered about that, but other things quickly took priority over her family's odd seating arrangements. Namely the presence around them of a large number, disproportionately so, of what others might mistake for bodyguards, but which Devora knew to be jailers. She recognized those devils after all as members of the Satan's elite guards, that they were now serving as guards for her family, meant that the Satans were keeping a very close eye on them. All to keep Devora herself under their control. Devora was torn from her musing of her fate when Lucifer said something that she couldn't tune out. And now it is my honor to present to you, my people, your seventh and newest Satan. Raise Satan. Devora took a moment, and only a moment, to process this development. She couldn't afford more. Not in front of the Satans and the entire gathered nobility. Gathering herself, she rose on wooden legs, the shock overcoming her enough that she rose unsteadily despite the week of practice at the ceremony that had been forced on her, to raucous applause from the audience. Even her family were happily cheering for her. The seating, the guards, it all makes sense now. Oh no. The guards. If I'm a Satan then it makes sense to have guards gifted to my retinue by the other Satans to serve as protectors for my family. Permanently. Which means there's no escape, at least before, we could have fled before the Satans hunted us down for our crimes, but now? With devils loyal to them at our backs at all times. There's no chance. Damn them. And they did it without even making it look like anything malicious. Everyone else won't realize their true purpose, they'll just see it as the Satans being generous. As the reality of the situation, of how her actions might have in fact put her family in even more immediate danger, dawned on her, she wanted to break down into tears. But she smothered it. She would not give the monsters the satisfaction. 0 line break 0 A week after her elevation to the rank of Satan, Devora found herself at a mustering ground in the outskirts of Lucifer preparing to meet her army for the first time. She hadn't wanted an army of course, having never led devils into battle before, she didn't feel qualified at all. When she had voiced this opinion to the other Satans, pointing out also that assigning her troops was thus a waste and would likely lead to their slaughter, Lucifer had looked at her strangely, almost approvingly, before declaring simply that a Satan needed an army. That was the end of all discussion on the matter. Her troops, and wasn't that going to be a strange thing to get used to? Having a whole army of troops at her command. Were preparing for inspection on the parade square of the mustering ground, but before she went out to meet them, she would first need to meet her officers. Oh relax. Rizavam, her ever-present shadow, chided. You're a Satan. It's these lesser devils that should be the ones terrified of this meeting. Not you. As you say. Devora replied neutrally as she always did to her handler. I think I hear them coming. He stood up from his casual slouch against the wall behind her then, and summoned a magical circle. What are you doing leaving? What? Devora said in surprise, the first emotion she'd shown to Rizavam since they'd met. Smiling mockingly at Devora, the son of Lucifer explained, you're a Satan now, can't be seen to have me hand-holding you, now can I not worried I'll use my new status against you, and your master's Rizavam's smile turned sinister, nope. Not when we have your daddy dearest, and the rest of your family, right where we want them. Devora glared at the older super devil, which earned nothing more than an amused laugh as he teleported away. Just in time too, as the door to the room, the office of the mustering post's commander, was opened by its owner. He led in her senior officers and their aides, and with a bow closed the door. This meeting was strictly for her and her men. Turning her attention to her men she surveyed them, and had quite the shock. Lalausha and Atlan were there. Well, what are they doing here? Devora thought to herself frantically, even as she fought, and mostly succeeded to keep her composure, her time with Rizavam paying off. Though if the simultaneously worried and reassuring looks her best friends were shooting her were any indication, they at least had seen through her mask. My Satan. The oldest looking of her new officers, greeted as he fell to his knees in an act of respect to her new rank. The others quickly following his example. Thankful for the distraction from her shock, Devora gestured for her men to raise. Greetings. The young Satan begun. I will not bore you by introducing myself, as you all already clearly know who I am. Unfortunately, for the most part save for Atlan Furfur and Lalausha Amon, I cannot say the same about yourselves. As such, even though we are short on time, before we begin I ask that the rest of you introduce yourselves. Short on time? What do you mean, my lady? A devil who looked like a man in his 30s with long blonde hair and blue eyes voiced her men's confusion. Yes, unfortunately, we've received word that the angels have made a major push against us and we are desperately needed on the front. As such, we will have to deploy as soon as possible. I trust this is we live to serve. The older-looking devil spoke for the others this time. He was a tall, slender, broad-shouldered devil with green eyes flecked with gold that wore the guise of a man in his 50s. His head was shaved bald, though he wore a set of bushy golden side whiskers. Good. Now introductions, then we can get on with planning out the details of our deployment. Or letting you lot plan it out for me. I don't know the first thing about this kind of thing, only that from my limited experience with armies both back home and in my few months on the front lines, that they need lots of planning. Devora thought to herself. Of course, my lady. The older gentleman said. I shall go first then. When no one objected, he began. I am Lord Tuin Vine of Clan Vine. I specialize in earth magic and siege warfare. I will be serving as one of your generals, commanding your 3rd division. Gesturing to his aide behind him, an extremely handsome devil that looked to be in his 20s with blonde hair and bright green eyes, he continued. This is my adjutant, my son and heir, Jamie. He is one of the greatest swordsmen of his generation. Devora nodded, she could see the family resemblance. I look forward to see great things from you then, heir Vine. Devora complimented, which earned her a blush from the young swordsman, before turning to the other devil who had spoken earlier. My name is Archox Eliger, lord of the Eliger clan. I'm old friend of your mother's. Devora blinked at this, her mother never mentioned this. Then again Devora hadn't spoken to her mother much, she was despite the many children she birthed for her father, notoriously unhappy with their arranged marriage, particularly the fact that she was married to her own first cousin, often taking it out on their children, like Devora, by being neglectful. Unaware of his Satan-straying thoughts, Lord Eliger continued his introduction. I'm proficient in ice magic and mounted combat. I command your 2nd division. This is Adjutant Hansel Larahe. Here he gestured to yet another blonde-haired devil, this time looking like a man in his late teens with hair that fell to his mid-back, much like his superior and grey eyes. What's with all these blondes? Is this Rizavam's idea of a joke? And of course, you know your old friends, Lalasha Amon and Atlan Furfur. They are my apprentices in the art of command. In a year of 2, once they're experienced enough, they'll be leading their clan troops under your banner as your 4th division. Eliger finished. Devora nodded but gave no other acknowledgement. She could ring her friends for why they were here later. If their clans were providing her troops, their fathers as clan heads should have been here instead. Very good. With the addition of my father, commanding my 1st division and garrisoning my lands. And wasn't that a bitter pill for father to swallow? With my elevation to the rank of Satan I automatically outranked him, and he was forced to cede the position as head of the clan to me, making Lady of the Mammon lands. Not that he said anything about it, he knows better than most that I had no choice in any of this, and neither does he. Putting aside her bitter musings, the Satan continued, that makes all my senior officers. I apologize that I cannot take the time to know you better now, but I'll be sure to do so as time passes. For now let's get down to planning our deployment to the front lines. Flashback ENDS 0 line break 0 as the day's court session came to an end, Devi reflected that it was once again an uneventful day, with only the need to address a couple of minor disputes between residents of Spiral Urbis Opes. With so little to go on in regards to the situation with the Ouroboros dragon, it was decided between Devi, Lalasha and Atlan that until they knew more, it would not be brought up in public, like in court. That said, Devi was still concerned and was of a mind to take some precautionary measures. To that effect, she called for her chief of security, Ellen Marchosias, to remain. She wore the shape of a 7-year-old girl with fair skin, waist-length purple hair that was styled into a Heim cut, topped with a large red bow, and golden cat-like eyes. Like Lalasha, Ellen was in a wheelchair, though unlike her best friend who had been hurt in the Great War with some kind of magical blade that caused an injury that to date resisted all attempts at healing and had left her paralyzed, Ellen remained in her chair. She was being pushed around, her chair was enchanted like Lalasha's, but she rarely ever used that function, by her wife and former human, Viola. Ellen's former victim-turned-devoted spouse wore the form that she had possessed when she had first fallen into the sadistic clutches of her wife, that of a 13-year-old girl with fair skin and a slender frame. She had blonde hair tied into 2 small braids with messy bangs that hang about her face, and green eyes. Ellen, have you been briefed about the situation with the infinite dragon god? Of course. Atlan sent out a brief to all of the senior staff. Good. Then I don't need to explain why I would like you to beef up our wards. Does this mean I get to use the more creative traps in my labyrinths? Ellen asked almost pleadingly. Yes, Ellen, you may use your more brutal traps. The Satan confirmed, before turning to Viola. Viola, I trust you to keep Ellen from going overboard. Yes, Lady Mammon. Hey. I know how to restrain myself. Ellen, you don't even understand the meaning of the word. By the gap, you demonstrated your love for Viola by brutally torturing her. Devi said as she turned accusing eyes on her friend. It worked, didn't it? Ellen countered with a shrug. Well, not everyone is like Viola. Devi explained. That's